Living alone in the wilderness is called the Olympics of survival. The latest season 11 has once again brought forth top-tier players. Not only did they hunt the largest animal ever recorded in the series, but they also caught so many fish they tired their hands. Whether it's archery or setting traps, they scored perfectly in every skill. This is Timber, newly dubbed the Moose Hunter. This video lets us watch his entire challenge in one go. Timber was influenced by the elders around him and fell in love with the wilderness and hunting at the age of 7 or 8. As an adult, he honed his exceptional wilderness survival skills. He now works with his wife in humanitarian aid, traveling frequently to unstable regions around the world. Seeing his 2 sons living a nomadic life, he signed up for the Wilderness Survival Challenge, hoping to win the $500,000 prize to buy a house. On the first day, the show captured footage of the dense forest in Timber's area. It was hard to move silently, which is unfavorable for hunting. Animals would flee upon hearing noises. After walking through the bushes to the riverbank, he saw moose and grizzly bear tracks, but they were old and not of recent interest. Timber returned to the forest, walked deeper, and gradually heard the chirping of squirrels. He located one, drew his bow to full stretch, and shot an arrow that hit the squirrel right in the head, a testament to his excellent archery. He then used the squirrel's innards as bait to set up several fixed fishing rods by the river. While he was busy building a temporary shelter, these might catch dinner. Timber crossed 2 logs and tied them to another large tree, covered them with a waterproof tarp, propped it open inside with a Y-shaped branch, and used wood to roll up and press the excess fabric on the sides. The shelter was then complete. Timber checked the fishing rods by the river and saw one line stretched tight. He pulled it up to find a 25-inch barracuda. Starting with the squirrel meat, he cleaned the barracuda by the river while waiting. After tasting the squirrel meat, he then cooked the fish. The small squirrel wasn't enough to fill him, but the barracuda, white and tender, juicy and succulent, Timber intentionally chose a waterproof quiver to use as a container for storing boiled water. Its capacity of 3.8 liters is enough for him to drink throughout the day. If the arrows are not secured, carrying them around can be dangerous. He cut 4 rows of holes in the arm guard, then sliced it in half down the middle. Folding it, he made a slit above each row of holes to ensure the arrows wouldn't fall out. Finally, he used a rope to tie the extended part to the bow limb, creating a portable quiver. Looking at his reflection by the river, this was the hunter look he wanted. Moving along the riverbank, he spotted very fresh moose tracks leading into the woods. Timber decided to follow the tracks. Unknowingly, he crossed the entire forest and looked ahead to a meadow. Surprisingly, a moose was lying on the other side of the meadow. Using willow trees for cover, he hid behind them and tried mimicking a female moose call to attract the moose. The moose stood up but didn't approach. Now they were 500 yards apart. Not wanting to miss this excellent opportunity, Timber crouched and moved closer to the moose, reducing the distance to 300 yards. Timber shot an arrow at the moose, but it flew just under its chest. The moose didn't run far. This time, with the right strength and precision, the arrow was unfortunately blocked by a branch 3 meters in front of the moose. Back at camp, Timber began to weave a fishing net. The sky gradually darkens. Every morning and evening is the time to check the fishing rods. Today, another barracuda over 80 centimeters long was delivered. That's not all. Another rod had a fish on the hook that was pulled ashore. In a very short time, enough food for 5 days was harvested. Timber decided to take this opportunity to establish a permanent shelter. He chose an ideal spot in his mind, picked up a saw, and cut down logs one by one. He planned to build an A-frame shelter, which looks like a triangle. Timber first set up the frame, then laid logs on both sides. The walls were quickly filled in, with moss packed into the gaps. One side was used for the fireplace and the other for the front door. In just 1 day, the shelter was mostly completed. The next day, he enjoyed a breakfast of tender, flaky fish, which quickly replenished the energy spent working. Suddenly, Timber heard footsteps outside the forest, sounding like a moose. He quickly grabbed his bow and arrows, and followed the sounds outside. Indeed, there was a moose feeding on the grassland. The terrain was advantageous. Stepping onto the river embankment, the moose was within the lethal range of the bow and arrows. Then he drew his bow and released the arrow. After the moose was hit by the arrow, it turned and ran towards the forest. He could hardly contain his excitement, and viewers through the screen shared his joy. Upon reaching the moose, He realized it was enormous, weighing around 1,200 pounds. Timber could not even turn it over. After partially skinning it, Timber immediately took out the organs to cool outside, and the strong wind was spreading the bloody scent. He feared attracting bears and wolves, so he lit a campfire nearby. The fire acted as a deterrent and also signaled to predators that this was human food. He also roasted some meat over the fire. Cutting up a large animal was time-consuming and exhausting. By 7 p.m., Timber had processed half of the moose. The other half of the moose was left behind. Timber worried about it all night, but fortunately nothing happened. It took him another 3 to 4 hours to finish cutting it up and moving it all back to camp. Back at camp, Timber first stewed a pot of meat for himself. He also planned to build a food storage room. Timber chose a location by the river for the storage room, where the terrain was lower and colder air would settle. Timber cut a large amount of timber from the woods and used these logs to build the walls on the prepared foundation. He placed the moose meat on a layer made of branches and sticks. By 2:08 p.m., the storage room was completed. The next morning, he was shocked to find a mink inside the storage room. Timber gathered all the fat, cut it into chunks, and rendered it into oil in an iron pot. Timber used birch bark and wooden discs to create containers for the rendered fat. He cut the large pieces of meat into long, thin strips, hung them on sticks, and placed them at the top of the cabin. Soon, the entire roof was filled with meat. Timber started a fire inside the cabin, controlling the oxygen flow through the door to achieve a smoky effect. Sitting by the fire, eating meat, he felt his stress release, leaving him relaxed and satisfied. On day 19 of the competition, Timber finally completed smoking all the deer meat and returned it to the storage room by the river. Today, he took some time to brew spruce tea. He also used it to dampen arrowheads and shave. Today, he moved back into the log cabin and made himself a comfortable bed. He used 2 logs for the bed posts and covered them with wood and branches. Timber felt physically drained. Now he was experiencing cold and hot flashes and sweating profusely. This morning, he chopped wood to fill the bed frame and used fresh branches as a mattress, significantly increasing the comfort level. While sawing wood, he inadvertently extended his left thumb too far, with hygiene conditions poor in the wilderness, which could lead to sepsis and another potential withdrawal from the competition. Timber found some spruce resin. He applied it to the wound for effective protection. He was woken up by the howling, about every hour throughout the night. At dawn, he went outside to the grassy area near the cabin and saw fresh footprints. Timber was not worried about facing these animals, but was concerned they might steal food. He decided to check the original moose butchering site to see if the rib cage was still there. He noticed fresher grizzly bear tracks. When he reached the butchering site, the rib cage was gone, with only the bear's tracks remaining. Based on his years of hunting experience, he guessed that the bear was likely hiding in a nearby willow grove. He quickly retraced his steps back to the grassy area outside the cabin. The temperature was dropping quickly, and 4 days later, he could see swans migrating south. Timber decided to add an insulation layer to his cabin using dead horsetail ferns, laying them outside the shelter and securing them with sticks to prevent slipping. For a touch of primitive style, he also mounted a pair of moose antlers on the roof above the cabin's front door, enhancing its wild and rustic charm. On day 30, with temperatures only a couple of degrees above freezing, continued to fish vigorously before the river froze. He caught a fish, approximately 24 to 28 inches long. He threaded a steel wire with a rope through the fish's gills and out its mouth, tying a knot. The other end of the rope was tied to a long pole, which he then placed back in the water. To celebrate a month of solitude in the competition, Timber planned to cook fish fillets fried in deer fat, anticipating a delicious meal. As he was about to start cooking, he heard splashing sounds from the river. He found that another rod had caught an even larger pike, providing about 16,000 kilocalories of energy. Following the same method, he tied it up and placed it back in the river. Just as he left the riverside, a gray crow swooped down to steal the fish fillets he had prepared by the fire. Timber caught this scene just as he returned. Fortunately, the fish was only pecked a few times and not taken away by the gray crow. Timber didn't have long to rejoice over saving it from further loss, as he soon discovered that the fish stored in the pantry had been raided again. So Timber decided to build a new storage room that would be impervious to all animals, where he first needed to saw plenty of logs. After assembling a square frame with a steel structure, he layered the wood to the desired height. For lining, Timber decided to use moose hide, which was tough and thick enough to deter small animals from chewing through. However, before laying it, he needed to patch a hole made by an arrow shot. Paracord wouldn't suffice. He had to use steel wire, which was also tough to chew through. Using a punch from his multi-tool, Timber made holes and threaded the steel wire through, quickly sewing up the hole. He laid the moose hide with the furry side facing outward, which would help absorb moisture when storing food. He then prepared several pieces of wood of equal length, cut notches at their ends, and placed them on top of the wooden box as a lid. The final step was adding a locking bar to secure the storage room. On day 32, with heavy snowfall, the surroundings were blanketed in white. Timber saw 4 moose grazing on the grassland outside the cabin, possibly a family of 4 searching for food. Perhaps because he had enough moose meat, or due to hunting regulations from the show organizers or local laws, Timber did not harm them. After enjoying the scenery, he finished working on the storage room. He saw a marten scurrying away, indicating that it was not afraid of humans but couldn't penetrate the new storage structure. This was precisely the effect Timber desired. The storage room was almost complete. Only one locking bar was yet to be installed. Timber aligned the logs against 2 large trees, then carved notches and fitted the logs into them. He hammered several wedges into the gaps, making the connections tighter so that large animals could not easily open it. The river had frozen over, and even without any special treatment, the food would not spoil quickly in the current temperatures. Timber went to retrieve the 2 fish he had left in the river, but unfortunately, the long pole tied to a 1-meter-long pike was missing. The frozen ground left no tracks, so it was unclear whether a bear, otter, or beaver had taken the fish, or if he had underestimated the fish's strength, allowing it to pull the pole away. Luckily, the smaller pike was still there, and Timber managed to recover it. He cleaned the fish by the river, removing the innards and cutting off the heads before placing the bodies in the storage room to freeze and preserve them. Recently, Timber has caught the attention of martens. Every day, they come to raid his storage room. Unafraid of humans due to their protected status, the martens boldly head towards the storage room in front of Timber. Quietly, he takes out his bear banger and fires it at a nearby tree next to the marten, then shoots another round in the direction it flees. He hopes this will deter them from coming back. Now, he needs to check the fishing rods at the river. On his way, he spots the long pole bound with the barracuda reappearing on the water's surface. Whether the fish is still on it is unknown, but he must retrieve it to find out. Timber hooks the pole, feels a tug, and realizes the barracuda is big enough for several meals. He quickly kills and stores the fish, feeling much safer. With snow falling, he moves the fire inside the cabin, which introduces a new problem. Poor smoke ventilation makes the air unbearable. The next day, Timber cuts away excess moose hide left outside the storage room and uses it to create a smoke shield inside the cabin, which significantly improves the situation. There's plenty of smoked moose meat, but it's too dry and tough, causing him dental pain. Timber needs fresh food. His traps in the forest yield nothing, but upon visiting the site where he had previously slaughtered a moose, he finds the chest skeleton dragged away by a bear. Using only bones left, he cuts several ribs to make fishing hooks. According to the show rules, if hooks are among the selected tools, only 25 hooks can be carried. Timber, now down to 4, decides to make his own. He breaks the moose ribs, selects suitable pieces, sharpens both ends, and drills a hole in the middle for the line, creating a double-barbed hook that prevents fish from escaping once swallowed. Timber quickly sets up a fishing rod by the river with his new hooks and checks his traps in the woods. The first 4 are empty, but to his surprise, the last trap contains a lively snowshoe hare. Timber swiftly dispatches it, relieved not to have to eat dry moose meat tonight. Rabbit meat is high in protein but low in fat, which alone could lead to malnutrition. However, Timber has plenty of moose fat to enrich the rabbit stew, ensuring a nutritious and satisfying meal. Securing food must not be neglected, nor should mental needs be overlooked. In his spare time, Timber engages in handicraft, carving 2 fox heads out of wood with a multi-tool, and adorning them with the fur of a squirrel he caught on the first day. He plans to give these as keepsakes to his 2 sons upon returning home. The fox carvings are quite lifelike, proving that wilderness experts are also craft masters. Timber notices he has lost a lot of weight, having shed 13 kilograms since the challenge began. He needs to consume more fish and fresh food. The fishing rods hold his high hopes. Arriving at the river, he spots a mink patrolling the shore. Following the mink's path, Timber finds the fishing line with his homemade double-barbed hook stretched tight, pulling up another barracuda, his speech nearly incoherent with excitement. The double-barbed hook, lodged in the fish's throat and protruding from its gill, makes it impossible for the fish to spit out. This is exactly the effect Timber wanted, boosting his confidence in his homemade hooks, eliminating his worries about running out of hooks. Living alone in the wilderness feels like a holiday. At this moment, he feels like the king of the contest. While others start working at dawn, Timber can still lie in his sleeping bag, nibbling on moose jerky, only leaving the shelter after he's somewhat filled. However, moose jerky is hard on the teeth. He needs more rabbits and more fish. After last night's blizzard, many animal tracks were quickly covered by fresh snow. Finally, one trap was triggered, but somehow the animal escaped, leaving the surrounding snow in disarray, with no clues about the escaping animal. The other traps caught nothing. With the temperature dropping, securing food is becoming increasingly difficult. Although Timber could survive 100 days on deer meat, he does not want to exhaust his supplies, as that would also indicate a worsening situation. That evening, while he was sitting by the fire waiting for dinner, a wolverine found his food storage. It tried to pry open the wooden lid to eat the meat inside, growling deeply. Timber inside the cabin heard the noise. He quickly grabbed his axe and went outside, but the wolverine had already disappeared. At dawn, he found the tracks it left in the snow. The moose jerky in the storage was undamaged, but the barracuda innards stored in a barrel were completely eaten. Having succeeded once, the wolverine might return. Timber must be prepared. Following the tracks across from the cabin to an open field, he discovered the wolverine was following his scent from yesterday, likely attracted by blood traces on his shoes. Timber is ready to hunt, but first he must temporarily retrieve the wire snares in the forest, as the slight struggling noises of trapped rabbits could alert the wolverine, who would then steal his catch. For now, he sets aside the intense and harsh matters of survival. He found half a moose antler in the wilderness, drilled holes in it to make a guitar body, used a straight, dry piece of wood for the neck, and topped it with moose ribs. The guitar strings were made from 6 steel wires. Timber uses music to alleviate his loneliness and stress. The moose jerky was over-smoked. He sewed a t-shirt into a bag, hoping to hang some jerky inside the wooden cabin to soften it naturally for easier chewing. However, he found mold on many pieces, confusing him since he had smoked the meat thoroughly. He abandoned the idea, fearing worse mold outside. For lunch today, he planned to eat fish, noting his dwindling moose fat supply, essential for maintaining weight. Despite eating plenty, the lack of carbohydrates left him feeling hungry, and his weight slowly dropped. On day 62, the river ice was thick enough to walk on. Timber walked to the center, cut a hole, and set up his fishing rod, hoping to catch smelt as before. After finishing, he needed to warm up. He lit a fire with dry spruce twigs, which burned quickly due to their rich, flammable resin. The flames quickly reached the ceiling, threatening to start a fire. He hastily brought a pot full of water from outside, sprinkled it over the precarious ceiling, and hung the pot to suppress the flames. He removed some large logs to reduce the fire. Though he avoided a fire, it was a close call. Timber needed to enhance the cabin's fire safety. He took down the moose hide, previously nailed up, and refitted it above the fireplace. He also patched many dry, mossy spots with mud, minimizing the fire risk. However, removing the moose hide worsened the cabin's smoke ventilation. He couldn't find a way to improve it, but it was still habitable. With another heavy snowfall, the ice was covered, insulating it and slowing further freezing, making the ice thinner and fragile. In sub-zero temperatures, it was hard to imagine open water areas. Timber's bait was taken, but no fish were caught, at least proving fish were still active. Other rods remained still. Due to overflow, his shoes got wet in the slush, speeding up the cooling of his feet. He felt numbness in his right pinky toe, worried about frostbite. He took off his shoes and socks. His toes were not black or purple. With proper warmth, there shouldn't be major issues. Once, he forgot to remove his shoes while warming his feet, smelling a burnt scent. The right shoe's edge was partially melted. Luckily, he noticed in time, and the cracked gap could still be pinched closed. Otherwise, in this weather, wearing damaged shoes could lead to frostbite within an hour. Checking the gill net is a daily routine for Timber. He first chops through the newly formed ice, then slowly pulls up the fishing line to haul out a barracuda. It's been a while since he caught a fish since the river started to freeze over. This time, he doesn't plan to ration the fish but intends to eat as much as he can. He places the cleaned fish on a wooden plank next to the fire to roast quietly. While waiting, he uses birch bark as paper and charcoal as a pencil to draw, helping to distract himself and avoid thinking of home. Later, he carves 10 wooden dolls and 2 dice to play werewolf inside the shelter. To increase the chances of catching fish, Timber takes out a new gill net he hasn't used yet and sets it underwater in an elaborate process reminiscent of the winter fishing in Chagan Lake, hoping the net catches more fish. That evening, Timber tosses and turns, unable to sleep because both of his feet are nearly numb from the cold, possibly due to insufficient food intake not generating enough heat. He has to stand up and move around, otherwise frostbite could severely limit his ability to go outside. That night, he only manages to sleep for a couple of hours, suspecting poor circulation in his feet because he hasn't been skimping on food. The only solution might be to eat more. His t-shirt bag is filled with moose jerky, but it's not all of his stock. Timber has estimated that even if he eats more each day, he could still last over 100 days. However, he dislikes the idea of depleting his supplies. The hard, tough moose jerky is also starting to cause his gums to bleed. The fishing rods and gill nets carry Timber's hopes, but fishing through the ice has only yielded 1 barracuda so far. He even wonders if the fish have left the area. Tonight, Timber plans to indulge by eating the entire fishtail. However, suddenly reminded of the many people around the world who are starving, especially those in turbulent and underdeveloped areas, he decides to leave the fish outside to feed the wildlife that are also in need of food. The poor results from ice fishing lead Timber to set a few traps in the surrounding woods. Yesterday, he spotted fresh shuttlecock tracks and quickly set up a steel wire snare. Fortune favors the bold, and today one of the traps caught a snowshoe hare. Delighted with this timely catch, as it's been many days without catching any game, he really needs a good meal to lift his spirits. Facing the camera, Timber shares his unique way of eating by pulling out half of the hare's lower jawbone to use as a spoon, perfect for scooping out the brain. As one of the few fatty parts of the hare, the brain is too precious to waste. He thoroughly enjoys this delicious rabbit meal. Day 81 arrives, and Timber has not caught any game in the past few days. His mental defenses weaken as he recalls different stages of the challenge. It began with sunny weather and lively animals, and he enjoyed it immensely. As winter arrived, the number of animals rapidly decreased, leaving Timber feeling isolated. The days became painfully long and difficult. He takes out the phone designated for quitting the competition, torn between staying and leaving. After pondering, he decides to stay a few more days, hoping to win the championship. Returning to the river to check his gill net and fishing rods, he hears the ice crack under his feet. A misstep could mean falling through, forcing him to quit for safety reasons. Timber decides to retrieve the fishing rods and gill net, relying solely on his snares for food in the future. As the competition progresses, contestants' resistance to setbacks weakens, and thoughts of quitting emerge more readily. By day 83, just 2 days after he last thought of quitting, Timber questions the point of continuing the endless struggle against his competitors. No longer interested in the prize money, he feels he has proven his capability to stay for 100 days. Regrettably, Timber makes the call to quit, narrowly missing out on the championship.